Welcome to the 2021 Girl Up Leadership Summit Tour in Asia and Oceania. We are so excited to kick off our first ever Leadership Summit Tour around the world. We are taking the time to visit 6 regions over 6 days, all ahead of our global summit, to hear from youth leaders, activists, and changemakers making a difference in their communities. Today is day 6, the final stop of our tour. And we are talking about how the global climate change crisis is exacerbating gender inequality by causing an increase in sexual and gender-based violence. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and don't forget to join us at the Leadership Summit on July 13th and 14th, where we're bringing together leaders like you to be a force for social good all around the world. When girls rise, we all rise.
Hello, everyone. It is lovely to be with you all today at our first ever virtual Leadership Summit Tour for Asia and Oceania, with our Global Leadership Summit kicking off tomorrow, 13th July. I'm Alwa, a SOAS Speak Out About Sex leader from Kazakhstan.
And I'm Ashley, the Oceanic Regional Leader of Girl Up.
We feel incredibly honored to be here as your host for the evening and are beyond excited to be sharing this time with you all. As a Girl Up leader, I have worked on sex education and gender equality in Kazakhstan, and over the years, learned about the nuanced intersectionality in this space.
My work on menstrual poverty with clubs across Australia, New Zealand, and surrounding islands has exposed me to the intersection between climate justice and gender equality. Women face social, economic, and political barriers that limit their coping capacity when disaster strikes. As climate change intensifies, women continue to struggle the most. The narrative of climate change is shaped by whoever tells their story first.
For too long, women have not had representation on the platforms that discuss our changing climate's realities, but that has to change. Girls' and women's voices need to be heard, and that is exactly why today we have organized a series of incredible women to share their stories and give listeners the toolkit to make change in their communities and combat these progressive issues. But first, a few remarks. Please don't forget to click on the chat icon on the menu bar at the bottom corner of your screens to tell us where you're joining from and chat with fellow attendees. Now I would like to read out the Girl Up's Brave Space Agreement. I agree to uphold Girl Up's zero tolerance policy on discrimination based on race, ability, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, socio and economic background, language, ethnicity, worldview, citizenship status, age, or class. I agree to uphold Girl Up's zero tolerance policy on hate speech, bullying, violence, harassment, and exploitation. Remember that we're not here to judge. We don't judge nor advise others. We can all speak up, but no one is forced to do so. And we listen to each other with attention, care, and empathy. If you experience anything that makes you feel uncomfortable or that violates Girl Up zero tolerance policy while you are participating, please email safety@girlup.org.
Now, up first, we have an incredible keynote address, followed by fireside chat, girl talk, and panel discussion. I now, however, have the pleasure of introducing our wonderful keynote speaker, Cindy Serena Bishop. Now, Cindy is a supermodel, actress, and TV presenter based in Bangkok, Thailand. In 2018, she founded the hashtag Don't Tell Me How to Dress movement to challenge social attitudes around sexual assault and the treatment of victims. She continues to use her platform to raise awareness about gender equality and has even written a children's book to promote comprehensive sexuality education. In 2020, Cindy was appointed the UN Women Goodwill Ambassador to Asia Pacific. Thank you so much, Cindy.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be delivering the keynote speech here today to all of you. And more than that, it is an honor to meet all of you who are just as passionate about gender equality and activism as I now am. I say now because even though I've always believed in equal rights for all genders and in women empowerment, my true advocacy journey only really started about 3.5 years ago when I created the Don't Tell Me How to Dress movement. And it quite literally happened overnight. with me posting an angry reaction to a newspaper article that I read one morning in which government officials were advising women not to dress sexy so as to avoid sexual assault in the upcoming Songkran Thai New Year festival. That article triggered a deep anger in me at the injustice of women constantly being blamed for their own sexual assault. And within a few days, the hashtag went viral, and I was soon knocking on the door of UN Women to see if they were interested in partnering with me to create the What I Was Wearing That Day exhibition, in which we showcase clothing worn by survivors on the day that they were assaulted, in order to push back against this culture of victim blaming that all too often focuses on what a woman was wearing, how she was behaving, how much she had to drink, or where she was at the time. The Don't Tell Me How to Dress movement has become Thailand's version of Me Too, that raises awareness about sexual violence in order to bring perpetrators to justice. It is because of that morning that I've continued to become a vocal advocate against gender-based violence. And like you said, I've written a children's book about body autonomy and consent, because we need to be teaching our kids how to respect each other at a much earlier age. It is also an issue that is of utmost concern to me, not just because I am a woman, but because I am a mother to a daughter and a son. And it is an issue that affects every single one of us, regardless of gender and age. According to UN Women globally, approximately 736 million women, that's almost 1 in 3, have been subjected to violence at least one in their lifetime. The COVID pandemic has also exacerbated the problem. However, when we look at the other ongoing crisis happening globally, which is the climate crisis, we realize that this isn't talked about enough as a factor in gender-based violence. This is particularly relevant for the Asia-Pacific region, an area that has a high vulnerability to both climate change impacts and natural disasters. It has been shown that sexual and gender-based violence against women and girls in the region has one of the highest rates and tends to escalate after a disaster. There's no doubt about it that women and poverty are linked, as well as issues like limited access to energy and food, water, food insecurity, and the impacts of extreme weather events, all of which are aggravated by climate change. Child and forced marriages tend to rise during times of crisis, as it's considered a way to generate income. Everyday tasks such as fetching water or firewood, typically done by women, exposes them to sexual assault. Even women environmental defenders and activists are threatened with sexual violence in order to silence and intimidate them. And unless this gets addressed, inequalities will only get worse. The two are interlinked. And if we are to fight violence against women and girls, we need to include climate action. And the only way to achieve both climate and gender justice is that the women who are most affected by the outcomes of climate change take a leadership role in stopping it. So at the end of the day, it all comes down to who's making the decisions, who's sitting at the table, who's even in the room. As part of the UN Women's Generation Equality Forum, which culminated in Paris this June, UN Women brought feminist action for climate justice to the forefront. It's a start, but we have a long way to go. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for you? And what can we do? If there's one thing that my advocacy journey has taught me, is that we don't have to wait for the experts. In fact, it's probably best that we don't. And the other thing is that you don't have to be an expert to do something about it. Everyone's advocacy journey is different. We are all trying to do what we can with what we have in this moment. And so I just wanted to quickly share some tips with you that I've learned along the way, in hopes that you perhaps may find it useful on your journey of activism. Because if there's ever a time we need boots on the ground, it's now. First up, pick a topic. Pick a cause, doesn't even matter what it is. There are so many issues out there that need fixing right now. My only tip is go with your gut. If it's something that you're truly passionate about, chances are it's going to be much more sustainable in the long run. My second tip is do your research. This is key. Know the consequences, know the causes, the players, the concepts of the issue. You'll be much more effective in mobilizing partners and bringing about true change if you do your homework. Third is find a team. Even if you start out solo, finding a team of passionate and like-minded people will help you get your project off the ground faster because there is strength in community and there is power in numbers. Fourth tip is keep trying. Don't be discouraged if your first campaign doesn't take off or you don't reach your fundraising target off the bat. Just like running a business, there are going to be failures along the way. The key is to not give up and continue mixing it up. Try different tactics, messaging, audiences, and approaches. And my last tip is stay woke. This is not a one-time deal. True advocacy is a lifelong path. But of course, at times, it's going to be discouraging, disappointing at times, either from lack of attention and action from your audience, perhaps maybe even some pushback, or even your own life challenges getting in the way of your passion. It happens to the most dedicated activists. My tip here is just take a moment to remind yourself why you care and why you're even doing it in the first place is a great way to stay motivated and inspired. Change can sometimes happen overnight or it can be gradual. One thing for sure is that change is possible. So thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for being an inspiration to the rest of us. It's you guys that are holding the grown-ups in the room accountable for their actions, and it's your generation that deserves a seat at the table. And in the words of the activist and politician, Shirley Chisholm, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. Thank you.
Now, thank you so much, Cindy, for leading our first address on the intersection between gender-based violence and climate change. I now would love to introduce our next segment, which is a fireside chat on the WASH and pathways to gender empowerment. This is an interview format conversation between the wonderful Girl Up leader, Meena from Afghanistan, who will be asking the questions, and the amazing activist and interviewee, Shomi from Bangladesh. Take it away, ladies.
Thank you, Alba, for the lovely introduction, and hello to all you beautiful people. I'm Meena Nizami, and I'm super excited to be here today to introduce to you all Shomi Hassan Chaudhary. Shomi Hassan Chaudhary is a multi-award winning water, sanitation, and hygiene WASH activist from Bangladesh. Shomi is the co-founder of global youth-led organization Awareness 360, a Global Change Makers Fellow, a US Department of State alumna, the Asia representative of the Commonwealth Students Association, a Royal Commonwealth Society Fellow, a TEDx speaker, a Schwarzman Scholar 2122, and an international election observer. She has received many recognitions for her social work of over a decade, notably the President's Volunteer Service Award from President Barack Obama, the Butra Award, Icon Award, and the Princess Diana Legacy Award. She has been titled as a UNDP Samsung Global Generation 17 Young Leader, becoming the first person to hold a recognition from the Asia Pacific. Most recently, she has been named a Forbes 30 Under 30 and highlighted as a featured honoree for social impact. Shomi, thank you so much for joining us today. Your brief bio was very inspiring, and we'd love to learn more about your journey so far. Why don't we start by you telling us a little bit more about your work and as a WASH activist?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Meena. I hope I am audible.
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone watching. Thank you so much again, Meena and the team, for inviting me today. My name is Shomi Hassan Chaudhary, and I'm a WASH activist, as Meena gave a very warm intro. Thank you. So as a WASH activist, my job is to go out to the grassroots level, raise awareness about clean water, sanitation, and hygiene, different aspects of it. So me and my team, what we do is basically teach about hand washing, for example, how to wash hands properly, things we are now talking about a lot during COVID-19. So things like how to filtrate water at home, what is the importance of drinking clean water, how to maintain menstrual hygiene, how to make reusable pads at home to maintain menstrual hygiene, things like that. So different aspects of WASH. At the same time, I also represent in different international forums, in different policy platforms, high-level meetings, where I share my experience at the grassroots level to raise awareness at the policy level as well, to influence change in the policy. side of things. For example, I try to influence why it's important to reduce the tax on menstrual products. For example, how can we increase accessibility for menstruators around the world? Why it's important to raise investment in the sanitation and hygiene space. So that's basically a gist of what I do, and I'm the co-founder of Awareness 360. And at Awareness 360, basically WASH is one of our focused areas. We are also working across 23 countries around the world. And we are trying to empower young people with different skills, different resources and tools, and the inspiration, the mentorship that they need in order to identify a cause that they really like to work on, and then trying to give them the space and the skills and tools to really work on that cause. And we basically follow the 17 Sustainable Development Goals framework by the UN. So yeah, that's pretty much a summary of the work we do at Awareness 360. Thank you, Meena.
Thank you, Shomi, for your response. Moving on to our next question to you is, your journey as a WASH activist working with sex workers in Bangladesh must have been very insightful, especially since it's a very unexplored space. What compelled you to conduct WASH campaigns across vulnerable populations in Bangladesh?
Right, great question. So actually, my passion for WASH, or the way I became a WASH activist, wasn't planned. I started working, doing volunteering work at a very young age when I was about 13. But then I didn't really have any particular focus area of work. I just loved volunteering, so I would sign up for any event that I had the opportunity to work at. But then unfortunately in 2014, so almost 7 years ago, on 14th of April, my mom suddenly died from diarrhea. And she was sick for only 1 day. And obviously you don't expect someone to die from diarrhea at this day and age. So it was very shocking and obviously devastating for my entire family. And like when you lose someone you love like that so suddenly, it is definitely difficult. But then when I figured out that the way I lost her, the disease from what I lost her was actually preventable, that whole thing just became unacceptable to me. And I started thinking that I, coming from an educated background, I come from a well-off privileged family. I never had issues in regards to access to water or toilet or whatever. But then yet I lost my mom and I couldn't do anything about it. I was so unaware about it. Then what about those vulnerable communities, those families, those marginalized communities who don't have access to awareness or education or facilities or anything like that? What about them? So that was the question that I asked, and I did further research, and I was exposed to the staggering statistics about sanitation, hygiene space, and how people are dying, like thousands of people are dying, and how 4.5 billion people don't have access to proper wash facilities around the world. And that's 60% of the world's population, more than half the world's population. And that's crazy to think about it. And that is when I thought that I need to, I can't bring my mom back. I can't, alter what has happened already, but then I can definitely save other people from going through that same pain that I was, which is why 4 days after my mom's death, I did the first WASH talk at a sewerage workers community. And the sewerage workers, because of the caste system and because of the work they do, unfortunately are considered as untouchable and unclean in Bangladesh as well. And I'm sure many people in India can also relate with me on this. And I felt like this is a disgrace. This is such a shame that we don't prioritize the work that they're doing, and we don't realize the importance and give them the dignity that they deserve, which is why I thought that they need to know about hand washing and all these different things first, because they work in such their work is so crucially related to all these. And after I did that, I mean, obviously it was very difficult for me to do that project because the pain was very new, very, very raw for me. It was only 4 days after that incident. But then at the same time, I also realized the incredible power of storytelling and how people could actually relate to me and my story, and how they were giving importance to the stuff that I was saying. And that's really when I decided to become a WASH activist. And that is how I sort of found my passion in it. And later on, me and my team at Awareness 360, we tried to identify communities like that. And that is how we came across the sex workers in Bangladesh and their condition, their living condition. They live in extremely unhygienic condition, and 90% of the sex workers are actually victims of sex trafficking. And again, back to gender-based violence, sort of the theme of this session as well. You know, and then we felt like, no, we need to go out there and you know, raise awareness about these issues. And that is really how we got into doing so many wash talks around these vulnerable communities.
Thank you, Shomi, for your insights on how poor sanitation can affect women and children, especially given the safety that the toilets provided for menstrual health management can be lowering the risk of harassment. My next question to you is, how has your gender played a role in your activism? What kind of challenges did you face?
My journey in becoming a social impact entrepreneur, a WASH activist, whatever you call it, it was, I felt like it became more difficult because of my gender, because I am a woman. Because when I compare myself with, you know, my male counterparts, my colleagues, for example, I have faced different kinds of discrimination at different times because of my gender, and I have faced that like in different occasions, really, and there are like endless examples. I felt, for example, after my mom died, I was told to stop doing the work that I do. No one was really understanding where I was coming from, or the passion, or why I wanted to do what I do. You know, I was even asked to get married because I needed somebody to take care of me, even though my dad is very well supportive and alive and doing very well. But you know, the fact that they were trying to impose their decisions, their judgment on me, and also asking questions about whether I can do it or not. You know, whether it's enough for me, or whether I have the capability or the capacity to actually run a nonprofit. You know. Whether I can be a female founder, things like that. So there were different questions and judgments all along. Even like when I had to travel because of my different you know, conferences or whatever for my work, I had to travel around the world. And then even in immigration centers, like questions like, okay, are you traveling alone? Where is your dad, or where is your husband? I think like that. So different incidences where I felt like I was not getting the proper respect, you know, and yeah, anyway. But what is even more shocking was to find out how gender inequality is so much prevalent, even in the WASH space particularly. For example, if a certain community doesn't have access to, let's say, clean water, and women have to, it's generally the women and girls of that particular community who would be assigned with the task to actually walk for miles, for hours every day, you know, to go and fetch that water, for example. There are like hundreds of thousands of girls who are dropping out of school because there is no proper access to menstrual hygiene products or menstrual hygiene management facilities in different schools. And there's so much stigma and taboo around this topic even today, that girls and women, after they hit their first period, they have to, you know, they're being exposed to like incidences of child marriage, for example. They're being married off. There's so much stigma. They still don't have access to proper period products to manage their period. You know, so these are all related to the WASH sector and gender inequality in so many different ways. Even if when they're walking miles and miles to fetch that water, for example, they are being exposed to, or if there is no access to toilet nearby, then they have to go to a distance to, you know, do their business, and then they're being exposed to, you know, greater risks of rape incidents, for example, or sexual assault, for example. So there are so many ways I have noticed gender inequality, or you know, women and girls being more exposed to risks of gender-based violence in the WASH space.
Thank you, Shomi. I think gender roles have definitely played a challenging role in lives of many women activists, and I believe it is high time for us to bring into the gender bias in activism. And yeah, thank you for your response. Moving on to third question. How do you understand the intersection between climate change and gender equality, especially in the context of Bangladesh?
Thank you for that very important question, Mina. Well, my understanding is that the intersection is huge. Definitely climate change is not gender neutral, and girls and women particularly are facing greater, the impact of climate change is being faced by girls and women more as compared to the other genders. And especially in the context of Bangladesh, we are very prone to natural disasters, flood, cyclones, storms, then landsliding. These are very common disasters that the people of Bangladesh face, especially in those disaster-prone areas. The percentage of population for girls and women is actually more, and they mainly suffer in terms of, for example, their crop production is impacted. Their livestock are affected. So in many different ways, there's the transportation system is affected. So they can't access, for business purpose or for whatever, or for even for to bring medicines or to access treatment. They can't they can't properly communicate or go to the places that they need to go to. So definitely their entire lives are at great risk because of the impacts of climate change. So I think it's important that those who are at the policy level, they keep these things in consideration. They already are, but then also we need to go back and check whether the measures in place are actually working or not. And also keeping girls and women in the decision-making space, in the policy-making space is also important, because research has shown when women and girls are in decision-making bodies, in politics and policy-making spaces, etc., they do tend to care about these other aspects, like family, the value of unpaid labor, things like that. So yes, definitely the intersection is large, and we need to work on this.
Thank you, Shomi, for your response. Moving on to our last question. What can our young audience do to advance advocacy in this space? What's your message to them today?
Well, my message, just circling back to this very good good tip that the keynote speaker Cindy shared, is that pick any cause, as she said, and it's very right. Just there are so many issues around us that we can just pick any cause and start working on it. But then also the fact that it's important that you are actually genuinely passionate about it, because this journey will not be very easy. There will definitely be challenges. So, and if you're not passionate about it, there is a high chance that you will give up, right? So it's important that whichever cause you find, it's important that you find your passion in it. You know that you're passionate about it. And something that I said since my TEDx talk is that find your passion in what bothers you. And if there is something, any issue, any cause that really bothers you, bugs you a lot, then I'm sure you would not just want to rant about it, but actually go out there, take that first step of action.
Thank you so much, Shomi, for the amazing advice and showing us a wide range of ways on how girls can be involved in any cause that they're interested in or that bothers them. I'm honored to have shared the mic with you today, and unfortunately, that is it. That's all we have time for today. And everyone, you can enjoy the rest of the summit. Thanks to Girl Up for their commitment to girls and advocacy, and Shomi for your time and participation.
Thank you for having me. It was great chatting with you, Mina. And thanks, everyone.
Yeah, same here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mina and Shomi. The wisdom you imparted was profound, and you had many takeaway messages from your conversation. We now have a panel discussion with experts and youth climate activists on the intersection between gender-based violence and climate change. And this session will be moderated by amazing, wonderful Girl Up leader Joanne Lee from South Korea. I'd now like to invite Joanne to introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Alua. Hi, everybody. My name is Joanne, and I'm currently serving as the Girl Up regional leader for East Asia. And it is a great pleasure to moderate for a panel of 4 phenomenal women representing the Asia and Oceanic region in the movement for gender equality. I'd like to introduce the panelists joining us today. First off, Jackie True, Fellow of the Academy of the Social Sciences, is a professor of international relations and director of Monash University's Center for Gender, Peace, and Security. She is also a global fellow at the Peace Research Institute in Oslo, and her research is focused on understanding the political economy of violence against women, sexual and gender-based violence and conflict in the Asia Pacific, and the gender dimensions of violent extremism and conflict. In 2021, Professor True was named one of the 100 most influential persons in gender policy for the gender-based violence area. Our second panelist, Nishta Satyam, was appointed as the Deputy Country Representative of India for UN Women. As the youngest woman to represent UN Women amongst 193 countries, Nishta Satyam is an unapologetic feminist, a trained economist with a keen interest in applied macroeconomic and fiscal policy. And prior to her career with the UN, Nishta worked with leading firms such as KPMG and American Express as an economist. As a policy expert, Nishta's interest lies in the intersection of policy, politics, and people to foster lasting change for the most marginalized. Our third panelist, Mitzi Janelle Tan, is a full-time climate justice activist based in Metro Manila, the Philippines. She's the convener and international spokesperson of Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, the Fridays for Future, or FFF for short, of the country. She is also an organizer with FFF International and FFF Most Affected Peoples and Areas, making sure that voices from the Global South especially are heard, amplified, and given space. And last but not least, winner of the 2016 International Children's Peace Prize, Kekasha Basu is a climate reality mentor, author, musician, and more. Kekasha is a UN human rights champion and the youngest ever global coordinator for the UN Environment Programme's Major Group for Children and Youth, in addition to many other global leadership roles. Kekasha is the founder-president of social innovation enterprise Green Hope Foundation that works at a grassroots level in 25 countries, empowering young people from vulnerable communities in the sustainable development process. Now, with this fantastic panel, I'd like to begin today's session with a question for all our panelists today. While pursuing your work, what intersections between gender and climate change have you encountered? And perhaps we could start with Professor True, then Nishta, followed by Mitzi and Kekasha.
Thanks so much for the question, and really nice to be here with such impressive co-panelists. So thank you. I think there are a number of intersections between gender and climate change, and I'd like to highlight three. The first I would just say is that we need to understand the impacts are always going to be different by gender. And just to cite one example from our region, for example, in Cambodia, where there have been significant climate-induced droughts, and these droughts are lasting longer and longer, often the impact on men is different than women because men migrate for work to as a result of the loss of agricultural livelihoods, whereas women tend to stay home and are expected to take responsibility for children, for finding food and water. So the impacts are very different on women and men given the gender norms in any given society, and this just being one example. The gender-based violence connections are really important as well. And I think what we can see, and we have been experiencing it with the COVID pandemic, is that all crises do tend to exacerbate existing types of violence against women. And in the context of the slow crisis of climate change, and increasing the severity of natural disasters, we can see this as well. And again, the contexts may be very different, but the causal chains are similar. So to give an example from outside our region, from research that we conducted at Monash Gender, Peace and Security Center with ActionAid, we found in Kenya, as a result of the extreme weather impacts of climate change, again drought, there was an increase in female genital mutilation because that is one of the ways that traditional communities prepare girls to be marriageable. And so that one of the reasons for this to marry off girls younger and to inculcate FGM is because of the loss of income from farming. And so therefore the climate change has a particular impact on girls that is also, I guess, exacerbating the types of gender-based violence, in this case FGM, which already existed. And thirdly, and I think I really want to echo some of the messages or already discussed by Shomi in her interview, and that is that what we see, the impact, the intersection between gender and climate change, is the fact that men dominate the decision-making on climate change still at the policy level, not only at the global level, but at the community level. Very often at the community level, even though women have first-hand knowledge of how to mitigate climate change, how to notice the incoming disasters, it's men who make the decisions, and there are often women are excluded from community decision-making spaces. So I think this is a real concern, and I think it is actually inhibiting our ability as a global community and as local communities to be able to effectively address and create alternatives to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor True. And then Nishta, could we hear from you?
Sure, thank you. I think it's indeed a privilege to be here, to be speaking to all of you. And of course, I'm very, very impressed by everything that my co-panelists have achieved, and some of the perspectives that we've heard so far are indeed very, very engaging and thought-provoking. Thank you for that robust introduction. Like anybody would say, even my mom wouldn't believe that, and nor do I prescribe it, but thank you really for thinking of me. For us at UN Women, this goes back, the conversation on climate change, as recent as it sounds, on the intersection of climate change and gender, as recent as it sounds, is actually a very, very old part of the discourse at UN Women. Because if you look at all the normative commitments that really guide policy making and decision making within countries, and if you particularly look at the Convention on the Discrimination Against Women, particularly Article 14 refers and contextualizes and asks for national priorities to be contextualized around rural women, women farmers, the rights of women to ensure equality, and it explicitly recognizes, the nexus between climate change, women's access and entitlement to food, nutrition, and also their rights in terms of access, control, and management of their own productive resources, their access to decent work, their access to healthcare. In fact, at the most recent COPs that have happened, UN Women has played a very, very integral role in bringing out the nexus between climate change and gender equality. And India, particularly, I think, is going through a very different time in its history, where we are looking at the visibilization of this nexus, because we know that in India, about 60%, and even globally, actually, 60 to 80% of all agricultural activity is carried out by women farmers, which at least in India represents about 325 million women. At the same time, we also know that only 9% of rural women own land, and half of them are not paid from agricultural activities, and for those who are paid, they make just about 50 to 75% of men's wages. So the link between poverty, access to land, has led us to, and of course the link to migration has made very, very visible the connections of what we call multidimensional discrimination, which means the intersection of gender, poverty, climate change triggered displacement or poverty, and of course, to all other factors. In India, we're seeing a particular trend on what we call the feminization of agriculture, which was basically the trend of men migrating to urban areas with agriculture largely falling on women, and the burden of debt in agriculture largely falling on women. Now, when you apply the lens of climate change, particularly climate change linked disasters, climate change linked linked poverty, you see that it has had a disproportionate impact on women. We also know what the impact of closing this gender gap in agriculture could be. In India, it shows that we could, if we were to acknowledge and address the impact of climate change on gender equality, we will be able to increase farm incomes and farm yields at least by 20 to 30%, which will actually reduce the number of hungry people in the world by 12 to 17%. So in very, very simple words, I think I'm glad that we've taken our time to speak about the intersection of climate change and women, because it's a very, very real issue on the ground, as we are seeing, particularly with trends like migration. It would be also very important to see how this changes in the post-COVID world. But I'm again very, very happy that we are visibilizing the links, because working on it will become that much more easy and that much more formal. And I think that's really the first step to addressing resilience and capacity in addressing such a complex issue.
Amazing. Thank you for that really thorough response. Mitzi, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this issue as well.
There are several intersections, as already mentioned by the previous speakers. And I guess just to give it a more concrete example, also here in the Philippines, one of the largest typhoons in recorded history, Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, it hit the Philippines and it devastated a certain region. And because of the economic impacts, those who were already economically marginalized, the farmers of that region, they were pushed into sex work, into prostitution, young girls and women alike, because there was no other choice. And so you really see the intersections of gender, of class, of the climate crisis. And then there's this other aspect that's almost not necessarily about the climate crisis, but about climate activism, where in the Philippines, our president, President Duterte, is one of such a openly misogynistic president, where that misogyny bleeds into the rest of the government. So earlier last year, someone from the Lieutenant General of the Philippine Army said that young girls wearing short shorts are doing this and calling for the protection of the environment to entice young men to join the rebel army. So they reduced women to tools to just the mental gymnastics that happened around that, to have women wearing young environment doing this to entice young men to become rebels. And it reduces the advocacy for the environment. It reduces women to tools. And it's just, you can really see how this narrative also bled into the people when we were calling out for justice and calling out the inaction of the government because of the typhoons that were hitting the Philippines week after week last year. People in the comments would be like, oh, you can't say anything because you're wearing short shorts, you're a terrorist. And it's really just how you see how climate activism, climate justice, gender justice, it all comes together, because really, if we want leaders who will actually take care of the climate, if we want leaders who will actually take care of people, of women, we have to have leaders who are the ones who are most impacted. Just as our keynote speaker said, it's about who is leading. And if the ones who are leading are misogynistic men who are from basically the class that oppresses everyone else, then nothing will change.
Thank you so much for that really important remark. And last but not least, Kekasha, would you like to provide insight on this as well?
Sure, thank you for the question. And it's not a question anymore of whether gender and climate intersect. It is very, very obvious that gender and climate were never ever separate. It's just that now we have recognized that the feminist movement is very much active within the gender space, and it's very important that it is addressed in that same way. So Green Hope Foundation's work, we turned 9 years old this year, it has always been about feminist climate justice and feminist sustainable development. I started my work as a 12-year-old. Well, actually, I started as a 7-year-old, but I started Green Hope Foundation at 12. And even from that age, I realized how important it was that gender plays such a very important role in our climate justice movements. And throughout our work and throughout all the years that we've been working on the ground, we have, of course, seen that the burden of rebuilding a community first, including and especially after climate change-induced disasters, falls on the women and girls who are victimized because of their circumstances. And that is a really big problem because this turns their natural leadership roles in feminist climate justice actions. It causes it to be ignored in favor of continuing with business as usual, which obviously isn't gender just. And to echo my fellow panelists, climate change impacts different parts of the world differently, and different people differently, and of course different people of different genders. So it's really important that women and girls and all of our diversity bring our unique lived experiences to the table, and that needs to be acknowledged. At Green Hope Foundation, we've seen this firsthand, from the rural communities in Indonesia to the small island developing state of Kiribati to Nepal. We have seen that due to climate disasters, there's of course an increase in gender-based violence, sexual assault, lack of access to sexual and reproductive health and rights, safe and legal abortion. And of course, it impacts adolescent girls severely in the sense that it causes them to drop out of school, which in turn increases the rate of child marriage. The care economy's intersection with climate and gender is also something that we see firsthand with, as my fellow panelists mentioned, the burden of housework and on top of managing the family already and trying to find new sources of income to support the family post-climate disaster also falls on the women and girls. So climate change really just amplifies these pre-existing inequalities, and that is why feminist climate justice is so important, wherein we have to address this issue through the lens of people and planet that takes into account this intersection between gender and climate. I was there when I was the youngest actually representing each of the 193 UN member states, the youth, when the SDGs were adopted. And it really saddens me to see that there has been progress, sure, but regression as well, especially after the pandemic. And now, as one of the co-leads and youth leaders of the Generation Equality Forum, Feminist Action Climate Justice Action Coalition, this is what we bring to the table, that we need these ground level actions that really address the intersections here. So whether we are working in the Sundarbans, which is the world's largest mangrove forest, where we've seen firsthand how first Cyclone Isla, then Cyclone Amphan, then Cyclone Yas just devastates the community. And not just because of the climate change, but that combined with the urbanization that destroys the mangroves, which in turn also causes an increased impact on the women and girls, with lack of education, with lack of access to clean water and sanitation, increase in child marriage. It is really horrifying to see that. And that is what Green Hope Foundation works to address, whether it is building deep bore tube wells and toilets in rural communities, or installing solar panels and solar street lights to ensure the safety of young girls and women in communities affected most by climate change, so that they're actually able to have safe spaces in schools, to ensuring the creation of a sustainable bioeconomy that is women-led and gender smart, that actually enables them to have a stable source of income. We work to provide the infrastructure to support the feminist leadership roles that women and girls embody. So I think it is a really positive sign that we are discussing this right now. And what would be even more positive is all of this talk really turns into action on the ground, and that is what Green Hope advocates for and does right on the ground.
Wow, thank you so much, Kekasha. And as you said, the close intersection of climate and gender justice really is no secret. And so I'd like to dig deeper into this because both Kekasha and Mitzi, you both spoke on your experiences as young female activists leading this intersectional movement for climate justice. So what type of skill development should youth and especially young women focus on to better advocate for climate justice? And Mitzi, if you'd like to start.
I think it also really depends on where you already are. But at least for me personally, a skill that is it a skill or more of a value, I guess, is really patience and understanding that no one is born a revolutionary. And so in this fight for climate justice and in this fight for gender justice, we have to understand that it's going to be a very difficult one. And we shouldn't get frustrated if someone doesn't understand that something right away, because we all started in a place where we didn't know and we didn't understand. And another skill a skill or a value that I think is very, very important is like knowing when to assert yourself and making sure that you know that you have that right to assert yourself. I think in this society, we're so used to women being told that, at least in the Philippines, it's still this very, be patient, be quiet, be understanding, don't yell, don't talk back. But we have to talk back because we're not being heard. We're being silenced, not just by our governments, but by the society that's telling us that women don't know enough. But the thing is, we do know more, especially the women who are most impacted, especially the women who are most marginalized.
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I do believe that the main skill sets we should be focusing on are ensuring that we become empathetic, responsible global citizens, and through that empathy have the passion, honesty, hard work, and the perseverance to keep moving and keep doing our work, because it is a very challenging field, both on the field and in the boardrooms and the policymaking environments. I also think that the main skill that we can implement in ourselves is education, where we educate ourselves, educate our families, educate our communities, and that in turn will ensure that you're able to localize your actions and address the most pressing challenges in your own communities. And, of course, the skill sets will have to vary depending on the region and the community. And it can be as simple as learning about organic farming and becoming poultry farming entrepreneurs. That is something Green Hope Foundation is implementing in the rural communities of Bangladesh, where we are distributing the organic seeds and livestock and enabling the women and girls to have a sustainable, stable economy, to, computer literacy powered through solar energy, as we're currently doing in Liberia through the installation of the solar panels and solar street lights, and teaching the young girls and women these skill sets so that they're able to venture out into the economy and have stable jobs, green jobs that uplift their community out of poverty and deprivation. In Western India, we literally this Monday, we distributed solar cookers to the women and girls of the community, teaching them about clean energy and how to use the solar cookers, because the women are daily wage workers, and in order for them to ensure that their children actually get to eat during the day, the solar cookers are extremely beneficial. So teaching them how to use that in a safe and healthy manner where it benefits their health and benefits the environment as well. So it's very obvious here that the skills are different in different parts of the world, but what we can do is have the knowledge, and whether that's self-education or going out there and trying to see how you can learn more about these problems. I think that is very, very important, but maintaining that empathy and that honesty and the hard work and the passion is also extremely important so that we can all become responsible global citizens.
Thank you so much for that. And I think both of your advice will be incredibly empowering and encouraging and helpful for all of our girl leaders tuning in into the session today. And pivoting just slightly to the very important role that public policy plays in advocacy, I'd like to ask Nishta and Professor True if you could elaborate on the importance of gender responsive budgeting and green budgeting for gender sensitive and sustainability oriented public policy. And perhaps we could start with Professor True.
Sure. I mean, I think for all of the reasons that people have pointed out tonight, the significant gender inequalities that persist and are exacerbated by climate change, that any response to climate change must have a designated budget to address gender inequality and to enable women to be educated and to come to the table and to be able to participate in community level mitigation and adaptation responses. So just as we've seen sort of targets for recovery, gender responsive recovery after conflict or after disaster, designate an amount of that funding to be really focused on promoting gender equality, we need to see the same thing right across the whole spectrum of climate financing. I think I'll leave it there since my connection is quite unstable.
Perfect. Thank you so much, despite technical difficulties. And Nishta, we'd love to hear from you on this topic as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, because I think it's very important to really look at policy level analysis and implementation of what we would call a gender action plan. First, let me start with what has been achieved so far. I think the integration of climate change and its nexus with gender was very important to be a part of the larger conversation on development. And if you actually look at the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, both recognize that climate change and disasters have differential impacts on women as compared to men. If you particularly look at Goal 13 of the Sustainable Development Goals, it focuses on women in marginalized communities and the issues related to the promotion of mechanisms for mitigating the impact of climate change or climate change-related planning and management. In fact, the Sendai Framework actually calls for the integration of a gender, age, disability, and cultural perspective in all policies and practices, including the promotion of women and youth. The first ever gender action plan was adopted at COP23 with the technical support of UN Women. And I think that is a crucial step in recognizing the role of women in climate action and incorporating gender equality in the climate change discourse. Now, while we look at policy, it's important to really look at the importance and the centrality of gender disaggregated data and knowledge generation. We know from our experiences that women possess tremendous local knowledge in climate resilient farming practices, resilience building, risk mitigation, which often only they are custodians of. The research on identifying and highlighting such practices, which is often led by resource poor women with little or no support from state or community institutions, will absolutely be one of the most critical pillars in generating the knowledge that can feed into mechanisms and programs on climate resilience policies, while ensuring that women's voice and leadership is recognized. What would also be very important is to look at or angles of which UN Women has looked at is the intersection of climate change and the energy sector. Again, there is a huge body of knowledge that remains to be validated, that remains to be integrated in what we would call gender responsive national climate change and energy policies, which will look at, which will lend themselves to climate resilient initiatives and programming. So absolutely, while I think that the international discourse, the larger discourse, has been set through the SDGs, it's very, very important to localize that conversation, to convince national policymakers, particularly, I'd like to pick on gender responsive finance of climate change, to demonstrate that evidence and also to integrate that evidence into our decisions and actions.
That makes so much sense. And I think all that both Professor True and Nishta you have said is completely true. And what really is important is for us to really work on that implementation aspect, based on experience and knowledge of all the things that we already know. And so unfortunately, we are out of time, but I'd like to squeeze in one last question for all of our phenomenal panelists to answer. So the climate change activism has seen mass mobilization of youth around the world. And so what is one thing that you would like to tell youth who are so uniquely positioned at understanding and responding to the climate change crisis? And perhaps we could start with Kekasha, then Professor True, then Nishta, and then we'll end with Mitzi.
Thank you for the question. Again, I would like to say that we as young people are amongst the largest stakeholders of civil society, and we're often told we are the future, but we are the present as well. And we are present leaders because we are experts too. We just bring a different set of expertise to the table. And I think it's really important that that gets recognized. But as young people, maintaining our empathy, our passion, our hard work and honesty is so crucial, where we support one another. And that is so important in gender justice as well. And just to say that, you know, in so many countries, especially in the global south that are also incidentally most impacted by climate change, youth are a majority of the population. So it's our present and future that is at stake. And young people bringing that unique passion, sense of urgency to this movement. And it's so critical that we give this the momentum to really surmount of all the obstacles that we face currently, whether that's policy or white supremacy or nepotism or patriarchy, corporate gain, gross ignorance. So it's really important that we address that. And what gives me hope is that history has shown us that young people have always been at the forefront of driving change. So let us just keep that momentum going. And I'm sure we'll be able to create a more sustainable and gender equal world for all, where we leave no one behind.
Fantastic. I might just add to that if I can. I absolutely agree that young people have always had the collective energy to bring about change, and we all need to be youthful in spirit, therefore. But what I think is really important is not only the mass mobilization of youth, but it's the mass mobilization of girls and young women. That's so very significant in our time, and has so much potential to really change the world that we live in and will live in. And of course, you are going to be the most affected. You have nothing to lose by mobilizing. But I would like to encourage all young women tonight to not only join movements and start campaigns and fundraising, but actually seek representation. Seek a seat at the table, stand for election, be a representative, because what we know, and this is one thing experts can tell us, what we know is that when there's higher levels of female representation in the parliaments of all of our countries, we actually have better policies, and policies that are more likely and more stringent and more likely to turn around climate change and to result in lower emissions. So I think some of you and some of us have to support you in those pathways to politics, to political representation and political change.
And I know that we are out of time, but very, very quickly, if we could squeeze just a few words from Mitzi.
For me, it's really just remembering that the youth are a revolutionary generation. In almost every historical moment in society, the youth have been there, leading the way alongside marginalized sectors of society. And we are just the latest wave of revolutions. We are the latest generation that's leading the way to a better society. And something that we always have to remember, that it's not the adults that's brought us to the climate crisis. It's not all adults, the indigenous adults, the farmer adults, the adults of our fishing communities. These aren't the people who have brought us to the climate crisis. There is a very specific set of adults that have brought us here, and it is the set of colonizers. And so as the youth, we have this opportunity, because we are in every sector of society, to really unite everyone. And that's what we have to do.
Amazing. And last but not least, Nishta, if you could also share your short remark.
I absolutely just wanted to speak from everything that my co-panelists have said. And I think gender responsive leadership is, I think, the most critical pillar. I think conversations, dialogues, discourses, policies, programs, everything changes, widens and diversifies when you have diversity in perspective and diversity in leadership. So to me, that's the first conversation. And I'm really glad that we've had a conversation that visibilizes the intersection, again, of gender justice and climate change. And I think we should keep talking until the connection, the nexus becomes visible to everybody, until we see it in our policies, programs, and on paper and implementation.
Perfect. Thank you so much to our 4 phenomenal panelists. And thank you all for tuning in. And I'll give it back to our amazing MCs. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joanne, and the incredible panelists. What an interesting discussion to really unpack this intersection between what at least I previously thought were 2 vastly different topics. I now, however, have the pleasure of introducing our Girl Talk by Girl Up leader Rasil Arora, who is an 18-year-old activist from New Delhi, passionate about gender equality and education access. She's interested in public speaking and solution-based discussions of social issues, with experience representing India and even speaking at the UN as the Indian rep of UNICEF Global Kids Council. She founded Girl Up TSRS and is currently working with Climate Science, a charity producing and spreading fun and reliable climate resources. Thank you so much, Rasil. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Hi, everyone. I'm Rasil from New Delhi in India, and I'm so honored to be here today. I just want to say how incredible all the women are who have spoken so far. I'm so inspired, and I'm sure the other Girl Up Club leaders and members are equally inspired. Today, I'm going to be talking about my journey in the field of gender equality through Girl Up and how it led me to explore other fields, most recently climate change. Women in India are weathering the same storm of patriarchy and discrimination, but in very different boats. A girl in rural India, for example, faces discrimination from birth to death. Before she's born, it's female feticide. After female infanticide, she hits a certain age, it's child marriage, then dowry, violence at home, and the list goes on. The progress made is significant, but nowhere near where we need to be. How could India have been the fastest growing economy while ranking 133rd out of 169 countries on the Global Gender Gap Index? This means that the progress made was clearly exclusionary. And even those with privilege and platforms struggle to assert themselves and their voices. So different extents and manifestations of that discrimination, different boats, but undeniably widespread, the same storm. These scary statistics and false ideas of development prompted me to understand gender equality for what it is, a complex issue with varying implications on different parts of society. And solving gender inequalities requires an understanding of that intersectionality, to contextualize the problem with respect to historical as well as regional context. Through school, I volunteered to teach girls English, and I was able to work with UNICEF to understand how education and empowerment is paramount to push the needle. Girl Up gave me a platform to channelize my passions at the school level. Founding and leading a Girl Up club was transformative. And Girl Up in a country as large and diverse as India forces us to combat echo chamber mentality head on, because we have perspectives all across the country, and everyone's perspectives are born out of their unique lived experiences, like mentioned earlier. So we're able to combat echo chamber mentality, expressing different perspectives, yet with a united goal, to empower women and girls. Social media in that sense has inadvertently become a space for news and a lot of perspectives on social issues. Social media presents several social issues to us daily, most in pretty fonts and pretty colors, mostly oversimplified or presented in binaries, making the understanding and then the solving part confusing. Sukhneet Kaur, one of my favorite writers, says that those with privilege can choose their flavor of outrage for the day. She advises to practice sustainability, that is, choose your niche, or find and develop your niche with respect to the cause you care about and move with purpose. I found my niche pretty early on, but my views on the gender equality movement have evolved, almost self-correcting as I learn more perspectives about the world around us and how gender inequalities have affected people. I've realized that gender inequalities trickle down to every part of society, not just other social issues, but even one with a scientific grounding, climate change. Through Girl Up, I was able to find an ecosystem of passionate people that wanted to engage in the field of gender. My advice to anyone around my age is to do that for yourself. Find a positive environment to nurture your inquisitiveness about a movement, but also yourself, thereby making the solving part with respect to the movement more efficient. Recently, I was able to join another such ecosystem, Climate Change with Climate Science. Climate Science is a charity driven to produce and spread accurate and actionable materials about climate change, the need of the hour right now, because the understanding part sometimes is confusing for many. The Climate Science Olympiad, the problem-solving event I'm helping to spread in India, encourages young people to ideate solutions to climate-based problems that give me the hope that structural changes and innovative solutions have the promise to push the needle. As someone that dropped science the first opportunity I got, I must admit, I've always been intimidated by the data and the formulae, so I felt I'd be out of my depth looking at the complex issue of climate change. But as I consumed more information and content as to what climate change really is, I grew to understand that it's something everyone should and has to understand, because ultimately it affects people. Climate change and female empowerment, as earlier mentioned, are inextricably linked, making strides in one benefits the other. A few examples. First, agriculture. Climate change has innumerable consequences on agriculture. Rise in heat waves, sea levels, and migration causes crop failure, food insecurity, and loss of income. In this already challenging setup, women are at a statistical disadvantage. Women have 20 to 30% fewer yields, and that's a lack of resources, widespread illiteracy, and restrictions from land ownership. Climate change also leads to more violence against women. Like Mitzi mentioned earlier, after the Haiyan typhoon in the Philippines, the country saw 3 times more violence. And that's because violence and traffickers tend to prey on communities that are vulnerable like that, hit by or stricken by climate-based disasters. Now, where do we go from here? I mentioned earlier that fostering gender equality and empowering women helps the climate directly. Climate Science's newly launched Women Empower Climate campaign explains 2 ways how. 1, empowering women to seek job opportunities and in turn make wiser decisions concerning family planning reduces emissions due to the resulting reduction in population growth. 2, according to the Center of Global Development, every $10 spent on girls' education prevents a ton of CO2 from being emitted in the future. The more I learn about climate, the more I'm able to put large, hot button topics that felt out of reach into perspective. So with issues like climate and gender, start reading. And they have such urgent consequences. So as you dive in, you'll realize that although one is grounded in society and the other in science, issues that affect people have links that make them easier to understand. It's when we start learning that doing and solving follow, creating a generation of change makers, aware of issues and their nuances. To wrap up, I hope that my journey to becoming someone that reads and cares about issues like these prompts you to start contributing to a cause you care about. Perhaps start reading more perspectives in the case of gender, or get a grasp of the science with climate change. Sometimes finding a group of people passionate about the same things as you, like I did through Girl Up and Climate Science, helps you further develop perspective with respect to the cause you care about. Thank you so much, Girl Up, for giving me this platform. And with that, I'll take your leave.
Thank you so much, Rusil. Now that concludes our session on the intersection between gender-based violence and climate change. To continue on each of your journeys to unpack these progressive issues and enact change in your communities, don't forget to download the Climate Action Storytelling Club Challenge and the Gender-Based Violence Curriculum. In the Resource Center, you can also find a link to the new Girl Up community platform where you can register today. And if you haven't already, you can start your journey as a change maker by starting your own Girl Up Club in your community, school, or college.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers for coming out today. And thank you to the listeners for taking the time out of your day to learn more about this issue, which is plaguing our nations and must be slowed down and eliminated altogether before it's too late. Thank you so much again, everybody. And that concludes today's session. Have a lovely day.